The father's justice. Rick, maybe it's time you start thinking about what's best for everyone. The words didn't sound cruel at first, not on the surface. They were delivered over polished marble, under soft chandelier light, wrapped in concern. But I knew what they really meant. I looked down at my hands, rough, cracked, still stained with oil from the engine I'd been fixing that morning. Work boots, worn denim, a shirt I had carefully chosen because it had the fewest paint marks. Across from me sat my son-in-law, Tony Martinez. Perfect suit, perfect smile. The kind of man who never had to prove anything to anyone because money did it for him. At least, that's what he believed. To Tony, I was just an old man clinging to a life that had passed him by. A small house on Maple Street, a truck older than his career, coupons folded neatly in my wallet. He had already decided who I was, long before I walked through that door. His parents weren't much different. Helen barely looked at me, except when she needed to remind the table subtly, of course, that some people struggle to accept reality as they age. Charles sat at the head like a judge, nodding slowly, as if my entire life could be summarized in one quiet disappointment. And then there was Jennifer, my daughter. She wouldn't meet my eyes. That was the part that hurt the most. Not the cold looks, not the quiet insults, but the silence from the one person who used to run into my arms after every long day. I raised her with everything I had, every dollar earned the hard way, every lesson about dignity, about standing on your own feet. And now, she sat there, choosing their side. The room felt colder than it should have been, not because of the air, but because of what hung between us. They weren't just judging me, they had already made their decision. To them, I wasn't family. I was a problem to be solved, an inconvenience dressed in old clothes, a man who didn't understand his place anymore. Tony leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled like he was about to close a deal. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. This wasn't a dinner. This was a negotiation, one where they believed I had already lost. 25 years earlier, none of this existed. No marble table, no glass tower, no man in a tailored suit calling himself CEO. Just dust, unpaid invoices, and a company quietly collapsing under the weight of bad decisions. I was 33 back then, younger, hungrier, and tired of watching other men gamble away what honest work had built. Charles Martinez had a name, connections, reputation, but behind closed doors, his company was bleeding. Payroll missed, suppliers walking away. Debt is stacking faster than steel on a job site. I remember sitting in my truck outside his office, engine off, hands gripping the wheel. Everything I had saved, 15 years of waking up before sunrise, pouring concrete in the rain, fixing what other men broke, all of it sat in one account. It wasn't wealth, it was survival, and I was about to risk all of it. Through lawyers, through quiet conversations that never carried my name, I made an offer. 51%. Control. At the time, it sounded insane. A contractor, buying the majority of a failing construction company run by men who would never shake their hands in public. But desperation makes people listen. Charles didn't meet me, never looked me in the eye. To him, I was just capital, a faceless solution to a problem he couldn't fix. So he signed. And just like that, everything changed. Not overnight, not in some dramatic burst of success. It was slower than that, quieter. Built the only way things that last are ever built. One project at a time, one honest deal after another, cutting waste, fixing systems, hiring people who actually knew what they were doing. I stayed in the shadows. No interviews, no title on the door, no seat at the table. Just ownership and patience. Years passed, and the company grew. Small contracts turned into major developments. Regional work expanded into national deals. Steel rose where empty lots used to sit. Glass towers reflected a future no one thought possible. And somewhere along the way, Anderson Construction stopped being a risk. It became powerful. Today, that same company is worth hundreds of millions. The offices, the salaries, the reputation Tony wears like a tailored suit, all of it, built on a decision I made sitting alone in a pickup truck. And yet, no one knew. Not Tony, not his parents, not even Jennifer. That part was intentional. My wife Sarah and I made that choice together. Late one night when Jennifer was still young enough to believe the world was simple. We didn't want her growing up thinking money solved everything. We didn't want her measuring people by what they owned, or expecting life to hand her comfort without effort. So we gave her something else. Normal. No trust fund. No shortcuts. No invisible safety net waiting to catch her. Just lessons. Work. And the belief that character mattered more than status. Maybe we went too far. Maybe in trying to protect her, we hid the truth so well that she forgot how to recognize it. Because years later, she married a man who thought power came from a title, not from the hands that built the foundation beneath it. And now, that same man sat across from me, convinced I was nothing more than a burden. He had no idea that the ground he stood on, the company he controlled, the life he believed he earned, all of it, already belonged to me. The riverfront project, that was Tony's obsession. To the outside world, it looked like vision. A billion-dollar development stretching along the water, glass towers, luxury condos, retail space designed to attract money from miles away. Investors loved it. The board tolerated it. Tony needed it, because behind the polished presentations, behind the confident voice and perfectly rehearsed numbers, there was pressure. Real pressure. Cash flow tightening, spending outpacing revenue. Deals that looked impressive on paper, but drained more than they returned. This project wasn't just another expansion. It was his gamble, his proof that he deserved the chair he sat in. And like every gamble, it came with one critical condition: access. The entire design, every road, every entry point, depended on a single strip of land sitting right at the edge of the development zone. Without it, nothing connected. No access road, no permits, no investors willing to commit serious money. Without that land, the entire dream collapsed. I had been hearing about it for months, quiet updates from my lawyer, small pieces of a much larger puzzle. Tony is pushing harder each week, offers being made, then increased, then pushed again when they were rejected. Frustration building. At board meetings, he called the owner stubborn, unreasonable, an old man clinging to something he didn't understand. If he'd just sell, Tony said once, according to the reports, this whole project would move forward. If he'd just sell, I remember hearing that and almost smiling, because that old man, the problem standing in the way of his future, the obstacle he couldn't solve, was me. My house on Maple Street, small, quiet, nothing impressive, sat exactly where his grand entrance road needed to go. Every blueprint, every projection, every promise he made, all of it ran straight through my front yard, and he had no idea. That was the part that made it almost surreal. He talked about the property like it was a number, a line on a map, a piece to be moved. He didn't see the history, the years, the life built there. And he definitely didn't see the man sitting across from him at family dinners, listening quietly, as he complained about the very land he was trying to take. The closer he got to the deadline, the more desperate he became. And desperation has a way of turning ambition into something else, something sharper, something dangerous. By the time that dinner invitation arrived, I already knew. This wasn't about family. This was about that land, and how far he was willing to go to get it. By the time I pulled into Tony's driveway, the sky had already gone dark. His house stood there like a statement, white marble glowing under carefully placed lights, glass walls reflecting a life designed to impress strangers more than welcome family. I killed the engine of my old truck, the sound echoing louder than it should have in a place that quiet. For a moment, I just sat there. Then I stepped out, boots hitting polished stone that probably cost more than my entire driveway. Tony opened the door before I even knocked. "Rick," he said, not warm, not cold, just practiced. The kind of tone you use when you've already decided how the conversation will end. Inside, everything was spotless. Too spotless. No clutter, no life, just expensive furniture arranged like a showroom no one actually lived in. The dining room sat at the center, Long table, dark wood, set, perfectly. 4 place settings, evenly spaced, like positions in a meeting, not a family dinner. A boardroom. Charles was already seated at the head, posture straight, hands folded, eyes sharp. Helen beside him, composed, elegant, smiling in that thin way that never quite reached her eyes. And Jennifer, she was there, sitting quietly, fingers intertwined in her lap, shoulders slightly tense. She glanced at me once, just once, then looked away. That told me everything. "Sit down, Rick," Charles said, gesturing toward the far end of the table, not beside them, not near Jennifer. At a distance, I took the seat. The silence that followed wasn't accidental. It was measured, controlled, like everyone had agreed not to speak too soon. Dinner was served, expensive food, plated beautifully, tasting like nothing. Forks moved, glasses lifted, small talk floated across the table, but none of it landed anywhere real. Tony spoke about work, about challenges, about strategic opportunities. Words polished smooth, stripped of meaning. Helen added her own comments, soft, almost gentle, but sharp underneath. "At a certain age, stability becomes more important than independence," she said, cutting her food, slowly, deliberately. Charles nodded, like it was wisdom worth recording. I just listened. Every word, every pause, every glance between them. It was all too coordinated to be casual. This wasn't a conversation. This was positioning. Jennifer barely touched her plate. Her fingers trembled once, just slightly, before she steadied them under the table. She opened her mouth at one point, like she wanted to say something, anything, but then she stopped, closed it again, and looked down. That silence, that choice not to speak, cut deeper than anything her husband or his parents could have said. I sat there, watching, waiting, because I could feel it building, like pressure behind a wall. Something held back, something rehearsed, something that was coming, whether I was ready or not. Tony leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping lightly against the table. A small gesture, but deliberate. He glanced at his parents, then at Jennifer, then back at me. And in that moment, the room shifted. The air changed, heavier, colder. Whatever this dinner was meant to be, it was about to begin. The moment came quietly, almost politely. Tony reached down beside his chair, fingers brushing against something hidden just out of sight. Then he lifted it, a thick manila folder, heavy enough to matter. He placed it on the table, not in front of himself, but directly in front of me. Slow, deliberate, like a card being played at the end of a long game. "Rick, we need to talk about your future." His voice had changed, no longer casual, no longer pretending. This was business now. I didn't touch the folder right away. I just looked at it, then at him, then at the others. No one seemed surprised. That told me everything. Finally, I opened it. The first thing I saw was glossy paper, bright colors, smiling faces, an elderly couple playing chess, another reading by a window, someone being gently pushed in a wheelchair by a young nurse with a perfect smile. Sunset Manor, the title read, soft, comforting, carefully designed to feel like safety. A nursing home. I flipped the page. More images, more smiles, more quiet promises of dignity wrapped in soft lighting and clean hallways. But underneath that, buried just enough to avoid immediate attention, were the real documents, power of attorney forms, property transfer agreements, guardianship applications, legal language, precise, cold, irreversible. I felt the shift in the room, subtle, almost invisible. Tony leaned back, hands folded, watching me process it. Helen's smile tightened slightly, as if she was waiting for understanding to settle in. Charles adjusted his posture, preparing to speak if needed. They had rehearsed this. Every word, every pause, every reaction. "Your house is becoming a burden," Tony said carefully, choosing each phrase as it had already been approved in advance. "We've been covering certain costs, taxes, maintenance, and it's just not sustainable anymore. That almost made me smile. I had paid every bill, fixed every pipe, patched every roof tile myself. But truth wasn't the point here. Control was. This, he continued, tapping lightly on the brochure, is a better solution. A place where you'll be taken care of, where you won't have to worry anymore. Helen leaned forward slightly, her voice softer, warmer, practiced. You'd have your own room, activities, medical supervision. At our age, independence can become dangerous. Dangerous. Charles nodded, sealing the narrative. It's a win-win situation, Rick. You get security, and the family gains stability. The family, that word hung in the air. Heavy. Distorted. I turned another page. The legal documents were clearer now, unavoidable. Sign here. And they would control everything. Sign here, and the house would no longer be mine. Sign here, and my life, my choices, my autonomy would belong to them. All of it wrapped in concern. All of it presented as care. All of it designed to look like kindness. But underneath, it was something else entirely. Cold, calculated, and precise. I closed the folder slowly, fingers resting on the edge. And for a moment, no one spoke, because they were waiting for me to agree, to accept the version of reality they had built, to believe that losing everything was somehow for my own good. I let the silence sit there, stretch, settle into the room like something heavy no one wanted to touch. Then I asked the only question that mattered. What if I don't sign? No anger, no resistance in my voice, just calm. And that seemed to unsettle them more than anything. Tony's expression tightened, just slightly. Helen's smile faded, not completely, but enough to reveal what was underneath. Charles shifted in his chair, the confidence in his posture cracking for the first time. For a brief moment, no one spoke. Then Charles cleared his throat, sharp, controlled. Then we would have to consider other options. Other options. The words didn't sound like a threat, not directly, but the meaning was clear. Tony leaned forward now, no longer pretending this was about comfort or care. We're concerned about your condition, Rick, he said, voice steady, rehearsed. Living alone, at your age, managing finances, maintaining a property like that, it raises questions. Questions. I felt it then, the shift. This wasn't persuasion anymore. This was pressure. We could petition the court, Tony continued, each word landing heavier than the last. Request a formal evaluation. Have medical professionals assess your capacity to make decisions. Helen added softly, almost gently. It's not about taking anything from you. It's about protecting you from yourself. Protecting you, Charles nodded again, sealing it. If the court agrees, they would appoint a guardian, someone responsible, someone capable of making decisions in your best interest. A guardian. The room felt smaller suddenly, tighter, like the walls had moved an inch closer without anyone noticing, because we all understood what that meant. They wouldn't need my signature. They wouldn't need my consent. They would take it, legally, cleanly, permanently. Tony's voice dropped slightly, quieter now, but sharper. You'd be placed somewhere appropriate, supervised care, professionals around you at all times. No more risks, no more mistakes. Somewhere appropriate, a place where doors closed quietly, where decisions were made for you, where your voice became a formality no one needed to hear. A place you don't leave. I looked at each of them, one by one, not strangers, family, people who sat across from me on holidays, who smiled in photographs, who spoke about loyalty, about love, and now they were discussing how to erase me. Jennifer's breathing was uneven, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She still didn't look at me. That hurt more than the words, because in that silence, she wasn't just agreeing, she was allowing it. The air in the room had gone completely still. No movement, no sound. Just the weight of what had been said, hanging there between us. This was it. The line had been crossed, and for the first time that night, I saw them clearly. And then, she spoke. Dad? Maybe they're right. Her voice was quiet, fragile, but clear enough to cut through everything else in the room. I turned to look at her. Really look at her. Not the woman sitting across from me, dressed in someone else's expectations, but the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders, the one who laughed when the world felt simple. Jennifer, I said softly, but she didn't let me finish. It's not what you think, she rushed, words spilling out too quickly, like she had practiced them but never believed them. We're just trying to help you. You shouldn't be alone like that. It's not safe anymore. Safe. That word again. Her hands trembled slightly, fingers gripping the edge of the table like it was the only thing holding her steady. We need this to work, she continued, voice breaking just enough to show something underneath. The project, the future, our future. It's not just about us. It's about the family. The family. I felt something shift inside me. Something slow, heavy, irreversible, because I remembered. I remembered teaching her how to ride a bike, running behind her down a cracked sidewalk, telling her not to be afraid of falling. I remembered nights at the kitchen table, helping her with homework after long days of work, pretending I wasn't tired so she wouldn't feel alone. I remembered holding her hand on her wedding day, promising myself that no matter what, I would always be there if she needed me. And now, she couldn't even meet my eyes. I just want what's best for everyone, she whispered. Everyone. Not me. Not anymore. Tony reached over, placing his hand gently on hers. A silent reassurance, a quiet claim of ownership. And she let him. That was the moment it became real. Not the threats, not the documents, not the cold, calculated plan laid out in front of me. This was the part that broke something. Because betrayal doesn't always come with anger. It comes softly, wrapped in concern. Spoken in a voice you once trusted more than anything. I looked at her, searching, hoping to find something still there. Some hesitation, some resistance. Something that said she didn't fully believe what she was saying. But all I saw was distance. And in that distance, I understood. They hadn't just planned to take my house. They had already taken my place. I let her words settle, let the silence return, heavier than before. Then, I nodded slowly, not in agreement, in understanding. You know, I said quietly, reaching into my jacket. There's something I should probably clarify. 4 pairs of eyes shifted toward me. Tony leaned back slightly, confident again, thinking this was the moment I would fold. I pulled out my phone. Old, cracked, nothing. Impressive. Exactly what they expected. Who are you calling? Tony asked, a faint smile returning to his face. Need someone to explain the paperwork to you? I didn't answer. I dialed. 1 ring. 2. Then, Tim Foster speaking. The voice came through the speaker. Calm, precise, professional. And just like that, something in the room changed. Tony's smile paused. Not gone, but uncertain now. Tim, I said, my tone steady, unchanged. Are you available? Yes, Mr. Anderson. How can I assist you this evening? Mr. Anderson. The words landed like a crack in glass. Tony blinked. Helen's hand froze mid-air. Charles straightened. Too quickly. And Jennifer. She finally looked at me. Really looked. I need you to activate Clause 17 of the shareholder agreement, I continued. Each word measured, deliberate. Immediate freeze on all company assets, pending an emergency board review. Silence. Not the kind from before. Not controlled. Not staged. This was different. This was a shock. Of course, Mr. Anderson, Tim replied without hesitation. I'll prepare the documents and notify the board immediately. Shall I schedule the meeting for Monday morning? Yes, I said. Full attendance. Consider it done. I ended the call. Slowly. I lowered the phone, placing it back into my jacket. No one moved. No one spoke, because in those few seconds, everything had shifted. Tony stared at me, his expression unraveling in real time. Confusion, disbelief, something deeper starting to surface. That's impossible, he said finally, voice thinner than before. How do you know about Clause 17? That's internal, I stood. Not fast, not dramatic, just enough to remind them I wasn't the man they thought I was. Because 25 years ago, I said, looking directly at him. I bought 51% of the company you've been running. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They just settled. Heavy. Final. Helen's face drained of color. Charles looked like he'd forgotten how to breathe. And Tony didn't speak. He couldn't. Because for the first time that night, he understood. The man he had just tried to control, the man he called a burden, the man he thought had no power, was the one who had been holding it all along. Monday morning arrived. Cold. Precise. Unforgiving. The kind of morning where everything feels sharper, clearer. Like the world has already made its decision before you even step outside. I walked into Anderson Construction headquarters just before 9. Glass. Steel. Reflections. Everywhere. A building I had funded, shaped, protected for 25 years, without ever putting my name on the door. Tim was waiting in the lobby, briefcase in hand, posture calm, like a man who already knew how this would end. "They're all here," he said quietly. We took the elevator up. 35 floors of silence, broken only by the soft hum of machinery and the weight of what was coming. When the doors opened, the boardroom was already full. 10 members, seated, waiting. They stood when I entered, not out of courtesy, out of recognition. At the far end of the table, Tony sat beside his father. No confidence now, no control, just a man trying to hold together something that had already started to collapse. I took my seat at the head. "Let's begin." Tim moved first, activating the screen behind me. The image appeared instantly. A nursing home brochure, bright, smiling, harmless on the surface. But next to it, the real story unfolded. Power of attorney forms, property transfer documents, guardianship applications, all time-stamped. The room shifted. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "This," I said, calm, measured, "is what your CEO attempted to present to me 3 nights ago under the pretense of family concern." Tim pressed another button. Audio filled the room. Tony's voice, clear, undeniable, threatening, explaining how I could be declared mentally incompetent, how control could be taken legally, permanently. No edits, no context needed, just truth. When the recording ended, no one spoke. Not because they didn't know what to say, but because there was nothing left to defend. Susan leaned forward first, her expression hardening. "This is not misjudgment," she said, voice steady. "This is calculated abuse." Michael shook his head slowly, disgust written across his face. I let the silence settle, just long enough. Then I spoke. "This company was built on trust, on discipline, on the understanding that power is earned, not taken." I paused, and what happened Friday night was neither business nor family. Tony shifted in his seat, hands gripping the edge of the table. "Rick, please," he started. I didn't look at him. "Motion," I said. Margaret didn't hesitate. I moved for the immediate termination of Tony Martinez as CEO. "Seconded," came the response, almost instantly. I looked around the table, 10 hands, all raised. No delay, no hesitation, no doubt. Motion carried. The words landed like a final judgment. Tony stood suddenly, chair scraping back, breath uneven. "No, wait, you don't understand. I was trying to fix things. I was doing this for the company, for the future." His voice broke. And then he collapsed, not figuratively, physically, dropping to his knees on the polished floor, hands reaching forward. Desperation replacing everything he used to hide behind. "Please, Rick, I'll fix it. I swear. I'll step back. I'll do whatever you want." Tears now. Real. Uncontrolled. I looked down at him, the man who had sat across from me. Confident, composed, ready to take everything I had. Reduced, in seconds, to something unrecognizable. "I'm not destroying your future, Tony," I said quietly. "I'm ending your control over it." Security stepped in. No force. No struggle. Just procedure. They lifted him, guided him out, his voice fading as the doors closed behind him. Silence returned. But this time, it felt different. Not heavy, not uncertain, resolved. Because in that room, in that moment, truth hadn't just been revealed. It had been enforced. 6 months passed, quietly. No headlines, no dramatic scenes, just time doing what it always does, revealing what remains after everything else falls away. The company stabilized. Decisions became slower, more careful, grounded again in reality instead of ambition dressed up as vision. Projects moved forward, not because they looked impressive, but because they made sense. People noticed. Not the kind of attention Tony chased. Loud, temporary, built on promises. This was different. Steady. Respect. Earned. Not demanded. As for Tony, I heard things. Not from the news, but from the same quiet channels that had always carried the truth. Interviews that didn't lead anywhere. Calls that weren't returned. A reputation that followed him into every room before he even spoke. Some consequences don't need to be announced. They just stay. Jennifer came by once. No arguments, no explanations, just silence, sitting between us like something fragile neither of us knew how to touch. She looked older, not in years, but in understanding. And for the first time, she didn't speak about the future. She asked about me. That mattered more than anything she could have said before. I still live in the same house. Maple Street hasn't changed. Same creaky floorboards, same quiet mornings, same workbench in the garage where engines still wait to be fixed. Because in the end, I never needed more. What I needed was clarity, and that's what that night gave me. Not about money, not about power, but about people. Because the truth is, you don't really know someone when things are easy. You don't know them when they smile, when they celebrate, when they say all the right things. You know them when they think you have nothing, when they believe you can't fight back, when they think no one is important is watching. That's when they show you exactly who they are. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do isn't to stop them. It's to let them speak, to let them act, to let them reveal themselves completely, and then respond with the truth they never expected. So if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, treated like you didn't matter, remember this: silence is not weakness, and dignity doesn't need to announce itself. It just waits for the right moment to be seen.